Okay, so we're into the final part of this module, which has been working on developing your left hand strength, endurance, finger independence, the key tips to practice and things like that. And also now we're dealing with a couple of problems like when we hammer onto new strings in riffs and licks, and this final problem which is about rolling across strings. Now a lot of the time when you're playing a riff, an alternate pick riff, you'll find that two notes will lie on adjacent strings but on the same fret. And when that happens, a lot of people's technique goes out the window. So we're going to develop this technique in isolation on its own before we do the riffs and the licks and the exercises that are going to work on your alternate picking side of things. So let's start with the first exercise, which is going to develop how to roll across the strings on each finger, because you never really know whether it's going to be the first, second, third or fourth fingers that are going to need to roll across strings. So first exercise on rolling across the strings. Let's give it a go, and remember you've got your targets there for good before you move on to the next part. Okay, so the first exercise basically rolls across the strings on the high two strings, the B and the E. We're going to start off on the first fret. Now the first finger is going to place down on the first fret on the B string, just as if you were fretting the note. But the important thing is that after you've fretted it, you're going to flatten off the finger without releasing from the fretboard, and you get this sort of roll motion. Your left hand is going to have to slightly curl around so that you lift off the fret that you were on and you push down on the fret on the adjacent string. So it's going to sound like this, not like this. The difference was obviously that the two strings are ringing together. You want to make sure that when you're rolling across strings for alternate picking sake, that each note is a separate note. You're going to pick each one. And we might as well, seeing as it's the alternate picking course, do a down followed by an up. But we're not going to really be working on speed on this exercise. It's all about being able to cross without hearing the two notes together. So you've got the first finger, like that. Then you've got the second finger. Same process, just behind the fret as usual. Then it flattens off whilst releasing. Whilst it releases from one fret to the other. Again, your left hand should be floating around the fretboard. You don't want to just have a second finger like this. You want to make sure that all the fingers, just like I talked to you about in the pre-picking stage, they're all hovering in the right place. Then the third finger comes down, you can see where this is going. And then the fourth finger, which would be the most difficult for most because it's kind of, I don't know, God's little joke to give us a little finger that doesn't really work quite as well as it should. That's going to be more difficult to fret on the tip and flatten off. You just simply move it up, and what I'd like you to do when you exercise with this is to go all the way up to the 12th fret and then come all the way back down. Then you go to the second fret, third fret, fourth fret, and so on, all the way up the fretboard, and then the same descending. Etc. down the fretboard. You'll find that going down the other way, because you're starting with the fourth finger instead of the first, it's a little bit more difficult again and feels slightly different because the fourth finger is obviously a lot weaker than the other one. So that, guys, is exercise 1, which gives you an idea of rolling across the strings, and do feel free to try it on different combinations of strings. You'll find that the lower strings will feel a little bit different. Experiment with it, but aim to hit the good level on this, and it's going to be a 2 note per string, 2 notes per beat pattern. So make sure you set your metronome accordingly when you're practicing to this, and you don't try to do 4 notes per beat. So aim for the good, and then you're ready for the next exercise that's going to develop this rolling across the strings, where you're going to see it in an actual riff. So exercise 2, this pattern here is a 5 note per beat pattern, so set your metronome accordingly, and it's a little bit of an odd rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is all about rolling across the strings, and we're going to be using the third finger to roll most of the time on this one because it's the stronger finger. We're going to descend down a minor pentatonic scale, and you're going to start on the 8th fret on the B string, and you're going to descend down. No cross string picking going on there, but when you hit this, which is on the D string, 7th fret, you then roll with your third finger to the next note, and make sure that you cut off the note that you just played. Then you're going to descend down. So we've got. Then once you've hit that third finger down, you're going to roll again. Come back up. And finish on that last note. So the full riff, nice and slow, sounds like this. Okay, this final exercise that we're going to be working on for the rolling across strings, for the left hand development side of things, is going to be a 4-note per beat pattern. You're going to use alternate picking throughout the whole of this riff. I'm just going to play you the riff first, and then we're going to break it down and look at what's actually going on so that you can learn it at a slow pace, slow tempo, and then build up depending on where you are. Okay, so this final exercise dealing with rolling across the strings, you can see how it used the third and the first finger to roll across the strings, and it was all alternate picked. Now, the best way to figure this out is to make sure that you do a downstroke when you hit this note on the 5th fret, because you're going to take the first 2 notes, which are on the 7th and the 5th fret, on the D and the G, and you do 4 down ups, down up, down up. Then when you hit this note on the new string, make sure you're doing a downstroke. If you're not, something's gone wrong with your alternate picking. So just make sure you practice this slowly so that you know which down and up strokes you're doing. So we've got. That's the main riff. Now that picking pattern stays the same way throughout. You're just changing the shapes that you're moving it through. So the next one is with the first finger now on the 5th fret on the D, and you're going to do a roll to hit that 5th fret. So that's the 5th and the 7th before going back down. Then the next one doesn't involve a roll, but the position goes down to the 3rd fret. And then the final position. Okay, so for the last part of the riff, when you switch to this first finger crossing the strings and rolling, the alternate picking changes slightly, but it's quite easy to remember because it follows a pretty easy to remember pattern. Now before, you've been doing a alternate picking pattern that sounds like this. If you had it on this one, it would sound like this. But the pattern that we're going to do, you do 4 and a cross, then you do 3, cross, and then a 2. So it's a 4, 3 and 2 with a cross in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.